Shelly Jain and Shalini Jain. Welcome to Partnering Leadership. I am thrilled to have you in this conversation with me.
Thank you for having us, Mahan. We are excitedly looking forward to this chat.
I can't wait to learn more from both of you on managing brand transgressions, how we can do it well, and the 8 principles that you share on transforming your brand. But would love to know a little bit about each one of you before we get there. Shalini, you first. Whereabouts did you grow up and how did your upbringing impact the kind of person you've become?
I'm so delighted to be here. My name means severity. And if my mother and daughter are to be believed, I don't live up to my name. I grew up in India and I'm a first generation immigrant to the United States. I have been married to my co-author for 32 years. And it's such a delight to be here and to be able to share our story and also about our book.
Shelly, how about yourself?
Thank you, Mahan, for having us on this podcast. Really excitedly looking forward to our conversation. So I was also born in India and I moved to the US in 1990 to do a PhD. I had a large family with one brother and 3 sisters, always jostling for resources and growing up with stereotypes which we had to break to become better human beings and those kinds of touch points in my journey, which are probably reflected in subtle and not very subtle ways in the book in some form or the other.
You shared the 8 principles to transform your brand. How can leaders do the right thing when there are brand transgressions?
Just as an explanation, we are often asked, what do we mean by brand transgression? Companies invest a lot of time and resources in building their brand and their relationship with customers. And there is a relationship of trust that is built between customers. And when that is explicitly or implicitly violated in some form. So while doing the right thing seems to be a really obvious thing, actually our research of 50 years of case studies in business, we found only a few examples of that happening. The one very famous example, which is considered a gold standard, was the case of Tylenol. Now, many people may not recall it because it happened in the 1980s. It was in Chicago, and some miscreant opened the bottles and replaced some Tylenol capsules with cyanide capsules, and 7 people died. And the company found out just as the story broke, as the rest of the world. So at that time, of course, there was no social media. But this was very serious. 7 people had died. And so as the CEO at that time, James Burke and his team were discussing the action plan, he took the position, how can we save the customer? And second, how can we save our brand? So right there was doing the right thing. And it was a very unusual reaction because normally what brands tend to worry about is how do we protect the brand? And at that time, also several of his peers or his C-suite team seemed to think it was an overreaction or perhaps not a good route to take till they were more certain about what exactly happened. But he chose that route. And then not only did he take that route, he followed it up with concrete, deliberate action. So what are some of the things he did? At that time, again, very unusual. He went on national television, multiple appearances, asking customers not to buy Tylenol till they got to the bottom of the issue. But again, it's very unusual, this kind of. Then there was a 800 hotline where real human beings were responding to consumer concerns or questions. This was 24/7. There were daily updates on what was happening. They worked transparently with the regulators. They invited them in to examine their entire manufacturing and supply chain to identify what could potentially be the problem. And there was another second incident in California. And at that time, James Burke took the call to stop, to pull all Tylenol from the shelves and to stop advertising completely and offering to refund the money for anybody who wanted to return their Tylenol. So if you just stop and think for a minute, we hear of transgressions every day, big and small. But this was a very exceptional stance of doing the right thing. And we're not claiming that Johnson has always done the right thing, but this is exceptional position to take.
It is interesting that brand transgressions are so poorly handled that I know Tylenol was beautifully handled, but it is one of the few examples where it was handled so well that we have to go back to that. But what I wonder is, are there capabilities that teams and leaders can develop ahead of time?
This is a difficult question. So just to, first of all, talk a little bit more about doing the right thing, Shalini captured the case really well. So what we are proposing in the book is doing the right thing means, first and foremost, address the pain and the hurt of the victims. Before you start thinking of the brand and the shareholder value and the stock price and the market share, which are important considerations, we are not dissing that. We are not minimizing, because a company needs to make profit to survive, to be competitive, to be able to repay its debt of gratitude to its investors. All those are important considerations. But Tylenol's example taught us and many people in the world that first start with understanding what are the victims going through and address the pain and the hurt. Now, coming back specifically to your question, can companies be prepared to have some kind of a roadmap or a framework? Thus far, we don't know if companies have such a framework to our knowledge. And the reason why we cite close to 25, 30 examples, case studies in the book is because we could not find a single company with a single set of principles or dictum which says, if you transgress, do X, Y, and Z, which is why we thought this book will be of some value to some corporations who are willing to read it. Having said that, we do capture some of the principles, Mahan, which might touch upon the answer to your question. So if you take the example of Boeing, for instance, 105, 106-year-old corporation, considered absolutely an amazing organization, which had such wonderful things to contribute to the planet and outside of the planet. And two accidents, two aircraft crashes have brought the company under such, I think, undesirable scrutiny, but necessary, undesirable, but necessary. And I think they forgot the first principle, which is the first thing that the ex-CEO did was blame the pilots of those aircraft and the airlines and said they did not follow protocol. So when we read that, even though we hadn't started writing the book at that time, both Shalini and I said, oh my God, how did he make that conclusion? That is such an immature attribution. So clearly there is a scope for training in this space. There is a scope, like there are in more non-business environments, Marines and Army and Navy, they teach them how to handle crises of the worst kind, how to respond to crises, how to prepare for crises. I'm not sure if businesses have such a framework. And I think my 2 cents, the reason is because of the overarching emphasis on the profit maximizing principle. I think that is what we have learned ever since the famous quote by Milton Friedman, that it's all profit. That's what the social responsibility of the company is. And that has become our guideline. That has become our torch. It's easy to follow because there is a metric, which is the bottom line. And all computations lead to that metric. If you don't do well there, you need to, do something different. If you're doing well there, great. But handling transgressions, handling crises, it is a gray area of sorts. There is no clear roadmap there as yet. And it will require some, if I may use this word with due respect, some disabusing of the manner in which we approach businesses.
There's an element of that humanity that you talk about that needs to be put back in. Now, one of the challenges that a lot of times I've seen organizations have I work with some political teams and political leaders is a combination of legal liabilities for some. And on the political side is if you admit to the smallest thing, then that comes back at you in the future.
So going back to the example of Tylenol, I'm sure the legal counsel also had similar concerns, right? But I think doing the right thing involves taking that chance. First of all, they didn't know what happened, right? So they couldn't say definitively one way or the other that it is our fault or it isn't ours. And so they were transparent and said, let's check it out. And I think that stance led consumers and society to view Tylenol as the victim rather than the perpetrator because of their humanity, because of doing the right thing. And then because they took that position and they were so transparent, the regulators found no wrongdoing anywhere within the Tylenol manufacturing process. A new law was passed about tampering-resistant packaging, and Tylenol was the first to come up with that within 2 weeks, which is again something is routine in our daily life today. So not only were they doing the right thing, they also took corrective action so that this would never happen again. Right? So they designed this tamper-resisting packaging, which probably cost them a lot of money because it would have to involve changing their manufacturing processes. So, and they lost I think their market share was 37%, and it dropped to 7%. And people said, no one would ever put a Tylenol in their mouth. No, it was just too risky. But by the end of it all, over a certain period of time, it went back to 14%. So they were able to appease shareholders as well.
One of the things I wonder as we reflect on this is the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, when they come in front of Congress and others, have gotten media training and practiced the same questions over and over again. Why is it that all the training, all the rehearsals, everything is guiding these CEOs to do the opposite?
So I think you do need some kind of an inner DNA which says, I have to respond in a manner which is really good for the victims to begin with. And we cite cases where companies, when they lost sight of that, some of them basically went bankrupt. And there is a case of Dalcon Shield, which is another old case. It was an intrauterine device to prevent births. And the first such device was really damaging to the woman's body. And they had to face ultimately 12,000 lawsuits. And the book covers in great detail how desperately the company tried to stall and stonewall any accusation. And they had to ultimately shut down, to cut a long story short. In the process, there was a lot of pain that victims had to undergo. And restitution, I think, for many of them never came. So there is this one side is we cite cases that if you are so worried about the legal issue and you're constantly trying to hush it and using your PR skills and training to deflect blame or to spin the story, that is your choice. And it's possible you might get away with it. It's possible, so to speak. However, in today's day and age, we make a case that we call today's day and age as an age of digital democracy. And we talk about information traveling at warp speed. So the good news is that the world is becoming much more empowered, much better informed, literally at the tip of our fingers. And that presumably is that invisible hand which will enable companies to realize that opacity is not a good option in our understanding. Take the case of Volkswagen, 2019 emissions cheating scandal. The CEO stonewalled the accusation. Ultimately, it was found that he knew when it was volitional. Then they installed the emissions cheating device. And right now, I think Volkswagen is poorer by almost $40 billion. And he's MIA. He's under criminal prosecution, and some countries want him for all kinds of wrongdoing. And so Boeing is also facing the possibility of criminal prosecution. So in 2024, these gargantuan and amazing corporations like Boeing and Volkswagen, when they are facing such situations, presumably this is a sobering moment to realize that all your PR training skills are nice. You need those PR training skills. But there are some situations when you're in a jam, you really need to think differently. And I also believe that there is this clinical cost benefit analysis that companies undertake when they're looking at the pros and cons of being transparent, of saying, oops, we made a mistake, and so on. So I'll just close with a short example, Mahan. In April, I think it was April, and I stand corrected if I get the timing wrong, Apple released an ad for iPad. And it was released, I think, on social media, on YouTube. And it showed some traditional art objects and creative pursuits like sculptures and paintings and music and guitars and horns. They are being crushed by an industrial machine. You probably are aware of that. And at the end of that dramatic crushing emerges an iPad. And the tagline is the thinnest iPad ever, or something to that effect. It was a very dramatic piece of communication. And the backlash was immediately equally dramatic, where the creative community globally said, this is horrible. You're telling us that iPad will take over. Now, the context is that artificial intelligence is already breathing down our neck, right? For many people, it's doomsday in some way. And the Screenplay Writers Association in Hollywood went on a strike for salary reasons and AI-related concerns and so on. In that context, you see this ad, you can understand why the creative fraternity had such a strong reaction. Now, this is what Apple did, which we think was really terrific. Within a day, they apologized. We are not saying every firm should apologize, but they took responsibility for their action. They did not deflect. They did not say, oh, this was done by a trainee copywriter or something of that sort. They withdrew the advertisement and they said, we will never release it on TV again. There is this addressing the victim's hurt, instantaneously taking responsibility, being transparent. If you think clinically, really clinically in the sense from an economic viewpoint, we think it was a terrific move. Because if they had pushed back and they had resisted and they had said, oh, come on, get a life. This is just an ad. Why are you going all crazy? Some people would have relented and said, okay, let it go. But they did not lose narrative in the process. If they had pushed back and debated, it could have become a monster of a debate. And who knows where that could have taken the brand and this whole notion of AI and so on and so. So I think even from a bottom line perspective, as we mentioned in the book, it is a good idea to think transparently, communicate transparently, address the victim's pain first and foremost. And to round off this, in that last principle we talk about is brand authenticity. And that is the long-term solution. It's part of the training module we think corporations need to undergo, which is when you make a promise, you relentlessly pursue the goal of fulfilling that promise obsessively. Sometimes mistakes happen. It's all human to make mistakes. And I think senior executives, their incentive structure probably is driven. It is designed in such a way that if mistakes happen, there could be serious penalties or something of that sort. So we don't have an inside look into the C-suite in terms of how they make decisions. But yeah, it's a complex situation, and yet there are legal issues. But based on some examples that we mentioned, what we believe is that if you don't act transparently, sooner or later, the legal issue will balloon into something you didn't want or hope. If you act transparently, there is a risk, but there is also a set of virtues that you might accumulate.
Couldn't agree with you more, Shili, and I love the term you use, that clinical analysis that people go through, as opposed to connecting to the hurt and the empathy that it takes. That's why I mentioned to you early on also, I see this as a great framework for leaders of teams and organizations to also think about when there is a perceived transgression on their part by their team or organization in handling it. So first, do the right thing take accountability, act with lightning speed, communicate transparently, choose principles over profit, treat each life with dignity, and then leadership sets the tone, build that authenticity through it. So I see it as a great way for leaders to think about their own brand as well.
I was an expert witness for a case, and the legal team that had hired me, the morning session was really challenging. Other lawyers were grilling me like crazy. And I didn't have any experience. I was green behind the ears. So I spoke to my legal team and I said, what should I do? What should I do? He said, look, it's your reputation on the line. We can't tell you what to do. You have to figure it out. And that was a really nice thing for him to say. And so I said, okay, what is it that I believe in? Where is my heart? I have to say the truth. What I believe is the truth, rather than worry about this legal team is paying me, so I have to do what they are asking me to do. So that kind of relieved me. It made me free. And yes, there is a personal brand here completely. Absolutely. So again, the case studies we talk about in the book, the ex-Boeing CEO, I think we don't even recall his name. The Volkswagen CEO is missing in action. James Burke has become a legend for the actions that he took. So even your personal brand, Tilly, either helped with these principles or hurt if you challenge or don't follow these principles.
Would love for you to share any thoughts whether middle management in organizations can play a role in this, or is this something that is purely the CEO and the senior leadership team of the organization?
That's such an excellent question, Mahan. So in our research, we have found fairly consistently that it is the top level management that sets the tone of how middle and front level employees respond or behave, or what an action they take when a transgression happens. So the organizational culture and the norms that are set up on what to do. And again, we have so many examples, Enron and of blatant fraud, where management set the culture. So in our book, we talk about Fox News, and when it is excellent in its ratings and it's generating a lot of, all the anchors were generating a lot of profit for the company. So they were satisfying shareholders, but a very key stakeholder, employees, particularly women, of trauma and harassment, decade. And it started with the CEO, Roger Reyes, but it went down to all the top male executives and key anchors of the channel, right? And the company did settlements to prevent these getting public. So talk about a culture. Like at no stage did anybody say, wait a minute, this isn't something that we believe in. This isn't a value we stand by. This is not respecting the dignity of each of our employees, which are several of the principles that we talk about. And this is not authentic, right? Nobody did that till it built up and then just blew up in their faces. And it builds over years. It's not something that just happened on a whim. And we talked a little bit about the Taj Mumbai. So here is an unusual situation where the company or the corporation was not at fault, but they were a venue of a terrorist attack, right? So the culture and the Taj, that is honed in the employees through their extensive training, is the customer is God, and we treat them as such. And in the spirit of doing the right thing, in the spirit of living up to this credo, a lot of the employees of the company gave their lives in protecting customers. That is the ultimate form of both. One would say this is above and beyond, not required, but they did it. So I think we believe, at least in our research, that leadership does set the tone. It's very difficult for middle-level management to do anything of consequence unless the higher level is in agreement or concurs. How would they go about doing it? Doing anything that was like they couldn't make the choice to be transparent. They'd make the choice to. We can talk about an apology. It's a simple thing, but it took Boeing 2 years to apologize to the victims' families. 2 years. So you use the word empathy. That's a fundamental requirement. If there's something that has happened that hurt your most valuable stakeholder, the consumer, why would you not apologize?
Now, one of the things I wonder in putting principles over profits is how can CEOs and organizations balance that?
So the balancing, let me just share two examples, which in our book, we transparently say these are the good brands that we want the world to follow. One is Patagonia and one is Ben& Jerry's. So they're very different stories, but they have a common thread. First of all, leadership is critical in both these companies. Patagonia was started by Mr. Chouinard, and it came from his realization he had a mountaineering hobby, and he wanted to create a product which had certain features. And then he realized if he created that product, it'll hurt the earth. And he'll have to break rocks and stuff like that, which he did not want to do. So that was the start of his business, which led to Patagonia. And right from inception till recent press coverage where he has said that when I die, I want all the profits to be donated to a sustainability fund. That's one brand. So there is no balance here. There is a commitment. He's not trying to balance shareholder value with his principles. He's saying, this is what I believe in, and this is what I'll do. And I'm sure not many people are thrilled with his ideas, but he's very clear what he wants to do. Ben& Jerry's, ice cream, for crying out loud. Ice cream, the most hedonic product that you can think of on the planet, other than jewelry and fancy hotels. They've created a social movement based on their respect for human dignity. So if any marginalized segment of society they feel is being marginalized, they get activist about it. They really start acting up and they say, no, they have to be respected. They name flavors to communicate their brand. And they are not really thinking about, oh yeah, in the process of being who we are, ignoring a significant chunk of humanity who hates us, right? So from the principle of segmentation, which we talk about in schools, yeah, it's a segmentation strategy. They have chosen to be with people who are whatever you want to call them, liberal or whatever, but they have made a choice. And if you are trying to balance, I think you will be potentially compromising on a lot of these principles. It is difficult to balance, and you can't be everything to everybody. And strategy is basically making choices. The counterexample is that of Budweiser. Bud had that logo, I think, of a trans person, and the moment there was backlash, they immediately withdrew. So I think they were trying to balance by not being so in people's faces. That's Bud's strategy. We felt disappointed when Shalini and I were thinking about it, that they're implicitly minimizing a certain segment of society, but that's their choice. So it is difficult to balance, there's no doubt. And balancing may or may not be the right thing to do depending on what your brand strategy is. If your brand strategy is, we will try to be everything to everybody, then your balancing question will be in your face all the time. You'll be walking on eggshells, trying to please different segments of society. But if your brand strategy is, we are very clear who we are focused on, even if you're not, Mr. Chouinard is not targeting sustainability conscious consumers. He is basically operating from his heart. And in the process, he has created a brand which is fitting with a specific segment of consumers. I don't think he had this idea that let me do this clean segmentation strategy and try to position my brand. It just came from his heart, and it happened to find a sweet spot, which is not the right way to do strategy. I get it. But this is how these brands have evolved over time. Balancing is a good question to ask. But if you are struggling with balancing, maybe we need to think about where our heart is.
I love the way you put it. And it's not Ben& Jerry's seeking a movement as a marketing strategy, and it's not Patagonia seeking belief as a marketing or positioning strategy?
So Boeing has hired a new CEO. His name is Kelly Ortberg. And we love what he's saying to press. We really love what he's saying. Two things that captured our attention and heart. One, he says we'll go back to our roots of being a great engineering organization. Two, we will be transparent. So this is really resonating with our book and with our principles and what we are hoping companies will do. So yes, CEOs can really take to heart the cultural change that is required for an organization which is dealing with turbulence. On the other hand, if the organization is not dealing with any turbulence at this point in time, I think the CEO in our framework should look into minimizing the possibility of transgressions, or at least have a framework which is in place and it doesn't come across as an incident where you are behaving like a deer in headlights. You don't know what happened.
So just to build on that, actually, Boeing was under threat of a strike, and they just reached a deal where they've agreed to give employees a 25% hike. Now, I don't know the match, and I don't know the how this will affect the balance sheet, which is already in a fair amount of trouble. But from an outside perspective, they are taking into account and treating another stakeholder with dignity and respect, which is employees. And so that is a good move, because without employee satisfaction, especially a company the size of Boeing cannot really make the kind of turnaround it needs to make, right? So when you think about this from the outside, that seems to be a positive direction. Another thing that they have decided is to make their next aircraft in Seattle. Now, based on the research we have done, the move away from Seattle to Chicago and North Carolina actually in some way contributed to the decline of the engineering, which was the safety focus of the company, and the fact that they are coming back suggests this, that he's acting on his statement that they want to go back to their roots. Of course, there's the negative aspect. Apparently, he flies into Seattle on a private jet, and so the damage to the environment is being called out. So you see, because CEOs are such public figures, everything is under scrutiny. And so I think, like many earlier CEOs could get away with whatever they wanted to do, not any longer. And all the more reason for CEOs to be aware that they are not only in the public, but the social media profile, and that every action of theirs is going to have some kind of impact.
That leadership action makes a huge difference. And as you say, the CEO's role is the most public. Now, one of the things that you both mentioned briefly, both about the CEO and just the environment that we live in, where in part because of social media, all employees in an organization have an impact on the brand voice. Because some of the more minor transgressions has been with employees and employee groups having a voice that is very different than the voice of the organization. How can CEOs and executives handle that?
I used to teach this case of an airline called Scandinavian Airline Systems. And the context is that SAS was in trouble for various reasons. And they hired a CEO called Jan Carlsen, Jan Jan Carlsen. And some of the actions he took to turn the airline around some of the actions included a mass training for his employees. And there was the Little Red Book that he circulated throughout the organization. This was before social media. So they created copies of the Little Red Book where he pretty much said transparently, honestly, with integrity, we are in trouble. So he didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't say, oh, things are fine, we will change. Everybody goes through ups and downs. He simply said, we are in trouble and we all need to work together to bring the airline out of this situation. So he communicated transparently with his employees. None of the employees was threatened by way of losing their jobs. In that situation, as you can imagine, people are sitting, they are really worried because if there is a cost-cutting initiative, many times the axe falls on the employees. So he assured them, you're not losing your jobs, but we are in trouble and we need to fight. And then there was a 1-week-long training that he got the organization to undergo with some trainers and consultants. And that whole week was around crisis management and having one voice about the brand, the airline. So I thought it was really remarkable how empathetic he was towards his employees, how completely transparent and honest he was that, look, we are all in it together, so let's fight together. And in a very subtle way, he gave the stake to the employees. You have as much a stake in it as me. And without calling them CEO, he basically gave them the designation of you are a CEO in your environment, in your territory, in your space. So fight. And there was this wonderful example where he also had a television in his office where he would monitor every flight's departure and arrival to see that they were departing on time and arriving on time. So he was obsessive about SAS becoming a terrific airline in terms of punctuality. And one particular instance, he saw that the aircraft had not taken off for 15 minutes. He immediately called the pilot. And I said, what's going on? So he sent a signal throughout the airline. Now, the empowerment of the employee was reflected in one instance where the aircraft was not ready to take off. It was delayed. And the flight attendant took the decision to give all the passengers free food and free wine, even in non-business class settings, something to that effect. And it was not permitted by the airline's policies, but the employee felt sufficiently empowered and responsible to take that action. So I think there are two ways to manage organizations, and leadership theories are out there. I'm not a leadership theorist. One is leadership by power, top down. The other one is empowering the employees. Shalini and I believe, and I may speak for her, that we really need to empower the employees. We really need to let them make decisions. And for that, you need training, you need a roadmap, and you need deep investment of the leader, emotional investment of the leader in helping the organization achieve that goal.
That makes a huge difference. And I believe you might have had a book to that title also, Moments of Truth, Jan Carlson, talking about every one of those moments
That's
and
exactly
the
right.
impact they have. Where can the audience find out more about you, follow your work, and the book as well?
So we have our website, which is brandtransgressions.com. So all of that we add to the conversation on your transgressions. They can reach us. They can order the book. So www.brandtransgressions.com.
We will put a link to the website, to your LinkedIn profiles for the audience to find out more about you and follow you. Now, as you're speaking to the audience, what is one thing you would challenge them to think about or do differently as it relates to your work with brand transgressions?
I would say treat your customers as you would treat yourself.
I would say the heart is what matters. We all have economic principles, which are very important, but if we balance it, the balance idea that you mentioned, if we bring in the heart, it'll make a huge difference.
What beautiful parting words, and both of your hearts come across both in this conversation and in your book, Managing Brand Transgression, 8 Principles to Transform Your Brand. Thank you so much, Shailendra and Shalini Jain. So wonderful having both of you in Partnering Leadership.
Thank you so much, Mahan. It was wonderful to be here.
Thank you, Mahan. Really enjoyable conversation, honestly speaking. We really felt connected. Thank you.